Hello, Acushnet. This is a meeting of the Acushnet Board of Selectmen. Today is Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. And we continue to meet remotely from various locations in response to the COVID-19 issue. And looks like we may be doing this for a little while yet, but hopefully the end is in sight. So actually, in some ways, I prefer this, but I won't say that out loud. All right, so first order of business, meeting called to order, Pledge of Allegiance. I think given the way we're doing this, we'll skip that at this point, not a flag to be seen anyway. First items, minutes of September 10th, 2019. Any discussion on those minutes?
Nope, read through them. Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented. From
Second, further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are accepted. Old business, first on the agenda is COVID updates. Ms. Hebert, you want to lead us through what's going on in the town with regard to COVID updates?
Sure. I think the major change that just happened today is Governor Baker announced that schools were being closed through the end of the school year. So, I mean, that's the biggest change that we're looking at right now. I know Dr. Bailey is working hard to try to figure out how to, get everyone through the end of the year. I actually wanted to talk to you about the schools. When I talked to Dr. Bailey, she asked about public hearings. I know we had that on our agenda from last meeting, and she does have a public hearing that she needs to schedule for school choice. So she asked if I could mention it tonight to see if it was something that would be permitted through the Selectmen as a public hearing.
Where would that be held? How would that be held?
They can do a virtual public hearing. Town council gave us some guidance on it. It would basically be a Zoom meeting. You would have to keep it open to the public. So town council's guidance was have somebody run it who is very technologically advanced with the Zoom forum, because essentially you give the number, everyone can join the Zoom conference or the phone number to call in, and the person who's running the meeting would have to be able to mute everybody. You can do it, it's just you have to be a little more savvy with the technology to mute everyone's line. But I guess there's a way to raise your hand if you want to talk at the public hearing. So just understanding how to use it and how to unmute people's microphones when it's their turn to talk. My understanding of the hearing that they need, it's a required hearing. There typically aren't many people who attend or speak at the hearing, so I think it's a little easier for them to control in that sense as well. Whereas, we've looked at PJ Keating, having 100 people, that's a lot more difficult. So I think this would be manageable for them, but it's also required. So
I think if they can do it remotely, my first impression was they were opening up the school building to have the hearing, which didn't feel right. But
no,
you do it virtually, why not? And it's important. I think that's something we'd absolutely support. Do we need a vote to that effect, or?
I mean, it wouldn't hurt. I know you voted the last time to, hold off on any public hearings except for the ones relating to town meetings. So if you would like to vote on it, that would be.
Yeah, let's, could I get a motion to support the school department's request to hold a virtual public meeting for purposes of discussing school choice?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Further discussion?
Do we have a date, Ms. Hebert, when they plan on doing this and notification to the public?
Yeah, I believe she said it was May 12th. It's their May meeting. So they would have to be putting out notice very soon. So May 12th.
Hopefully they won't have any problems with the Zoom meeting and how many participants. They say that they don't normally have a lot of activity at this public hearing.
That's correct.
Yeah, so as long as they don't see it, how it could be detrimental to the decision-making process or the process in general, I don't have a problem with it either.
Great.
Okay. Motion second. All in favor?
All right.
Any opposed?
Can I just put out one thing too, just to let everybody know? Donna from planning has fallen and broken her hip.
Oh, boy.
So she's been in the hospital. So she's kind of worried about her public hearings, which she called me like literally the day after she fell and broke her hip, and it was, after surgery. And she was worried about her public hearings. So I don't know what we should be.
We haven't scheduled public hearings for the
No,
planning
there aren't
board.
any.
There's just, I think there's a couple of bylaw changes that might need to be looked at. I think they need
Yeah,
to
that's
have some
fine. That's
hearings.
fine. That's fine, but we don't know when they're gonna plan those public hearings. I mean, you guys postponed town meeting till the 22nd of June or something?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll talk to her too, Lisa, and I'll work with Henry. I believe they were planning to schedule those hearings for the week before town meeting.
Okay.
So she has some time, I think.
And if Donna's watching, we wish you a speedy recovery.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, question.
Roche,
Julie, this is directed at Julie. What is the current number of cases that we have in Acushnet? How is it?
17 is the last number
17.
I heard, yeah.
Well, I have to thank the residents for keeping, practicing social distancing. We had a couple of big events happen this weekend that I saw numerous cars with the opening of the Creamery and Country Whip.
Mm.
So that seemed to have, people, what I saw, kept their distances. And so
They actually, they have a very good plan in place. I've heard about the Creamery, and they do it pretty well where their parking lot spaces are numbered. You show up, you text them, say I'm there, and what parking spot you're in. They come out with a carriage, deliver your ice cream to you in a carriage. They have a pretty good system over there. I commend them for what they've done there.
So I'd just like to mention to my fellow select board members, I've been watching the numbers statewide. The last 6 days, we've had a reduction in cases, new cases of the COVID-19 virus.
Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts, that's correct.
Right.
I just want to put it out there to you guys, start thinking about an exit strategy. Maybe that's a little too soon to bring it up, but as you know, our restaurants in town, the golf course we talked about next week, making a decision on that. Maybe we can talk to the people, the restaurateurs and the golf course, see what kind of plans they're thinking of. So when we're able to, come out of the state of emergency, what course, what protocol they will follow.
We do not have a meeting scheduled for next Tuesday. Just next Tuesday was supposed to be the continuation of the PJ Keating hearing. I mean, if we've got things for the agenda, we can certainly schedule a meeting, but we at this point don't have a meeting scheduled for the 28th. Our next meeting is the 5th, but we can certainly schedule a meeting if we need one. But
Okay.
yeah, we do need an exit strategy from this. I think it's certainly right now, but.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I agree with Mr. Roche. I've been watching the numbers as well, the state numbers in Bristol County numbers. I mean, we still have, increasing cases, but they have come down from where they were, accelerating day after day. I guess Mr. DeRoche and I are doing the same thing, watching pretty much the same numbers and seeing how it goes. And I wrote down myself a little note. I'm glad Mr. DeRoche mentioned it, a plan to reopen golf. And I'd like for the board to consider a plan for town hall when we're ready. What are we going to do? Are we going to ask Mr. Merritt to take a look at where our residents are coming in and interacting, the counters that we're interacting with, the collector's office, maybe the assessor's office, whatever other office we can think of, is maybe hang one of those plexiglass shields down like they do in convenience stores and things of that nature. I'd like for the board to at least start thinking about this, because Jim's going to have to get some plexiglass. Sometimes it's not that easy to get your hands on sheets of it, what he's going to need to do, and at least give him some time to thought process of whether he's going to cable it and hang it like we see in some places. I know that there's granite countertops in the assessor's office now, in the collector's office, so you can't screw down into that. So at least to give Jim you know, an idea of what the board's thinking of, you know, for when we get to that stage and we open up. I don't think it's, you know, it's a light switch we flip and everything's back to normal. I think we still got to do what we can to protect our employees and protect the people that are coming in and you know, getting involved with our employees in that. So it's a back and forth thing. So those are some of the things I thought of for the reopening. And I would like the board to at least think about it. Maybe we can shoot Julie over a call or a text message or something and talk to her if we endorse it or not. But I think that some safeguard like that might be a good idea.
Could, Julie, could you have a conversation with Mr. Merritt about that tomorrow? And I think, you know, I think this is going to be, as we transition back to normal, I think we're still going to want to separate our employees from the public for a little time. So I think the idea of plexiglass suspended from the ceiling might be a good one. So can you discuss that with Mr. Merritt, have him, even at this early time, consider options? Because I think when we go live, I think that's probably a good interim step.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anything else on COVID updates?
That's all I have.
Okay. Fiscal 21 budget articles discussion. You distributed a new version of the budget. You distributed the articles just came out. Honestly, I haven't really spent a lot.
Yeah, I know. I haven't had a chance.
Very truthfully.
Yeah.
Why don't you, if you could, just take us through what the new budget numbers look like?
Sure. Let me just pull up.
I've got them open as well, so we'll jump to that.
Sorry, let me just pull it up here.
Roger, while she's pulling up, can I say something?
Yes, go, Mr. Gasper.
I'd like to thank Ms. Hebert actually in putting together that budget presentation that she did. It's very informative. I think it's clear and to the point. We get to see all the movements. She's actually labeled a column COVID-19. And, you know, I was able to look through budgets and browse through them quickly to look at some of the changes and the numbers where they would change and things of that nature. But from first glimpse, I just like to thank Ms. Hebert for her efforts in getting that budget platform done for the Board of Selectmen for our review. I have spent a little bit of time looking at it, and it's very easy to understand, and I think she did a great job on that budget presentation for the board.
Agreed. There's a lot of work here.
And as far as articles go, I haven't looked at that. You gentlemen know that we received that around 2:30 this afternoon, so we have some time to look at it. She left that in a note that we have time to review it, so I think that's something that we should get done as soon as we can. So the next meeting that we have, we should be discussing what articles we want for the warrant, what ones we don't. Communicate that with the planning board, whatever they have. Maybe there's a couple that we don't need to have. It's not necessarily needed right now to limit the public hearing time, things of that nature. So I'll be reviewing the articles, but again, I just want to thank Ms. Hebert for her job with the budgets. It's really clean and very well presented.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
This is really.
And it's been really hard to keep up with all the changes and I want it in a format that's easy for everyone. I know you are all familiar with looking at budgets, but for other people who may not be as familiar, to have it very easy to follow. So
yeah, the sheet with the summary by departments.
Yeah, it was very helpful.
Good. So essentially, what I look when I'm looking at the budget cuts, the numbers that I plugged in were our department's best efforts at cutting 10% of their expenses from last year's budget. Obviously, every department is not able to do that.
And those are non-salary line items only, correct?
That's correct. So, CMAS is a great example. It's all contractual. There is nothing that they can cut from that budget that would be meaningful for the residents of Acushnet. So that budget stayed the same. Other people had a little more flexibility in their budgets. Certain departments where easy things to cut are things like travel or trainings for next year, because we kind of don't know what the situation will be like. There may not be trainings next year. The situation could extend well into the year. And so some were easier than others to cut. I don't know if you want to look at any in particular, but everybody, you know, again, I commend the department heads. They all worked really hard to try to get numbers back and get an explanation that would be helpful for the Board of Selectmen to consider in making these cuts. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but everyone did the best job that they could with what they had. I'm still waiting for a final number for the school. I plugged in an estimate. I know that they have their budget subcommittee that's meeting on Thursday this week. And obviously, you know, the school, it's a challenge for them to make cuts to their budget. We talked about this when we have the school hearing with the finance committee and the school committee. They have a lot of positions that they were looking to add this year. I know a reading specialist is one in particular that they were concerned about. So obviously asking them to make cuts to their budget is a hefty task as well. And I'm really grateful for them for, you know, making their best effort, and we'll see what they come back with on Thursday as well. So the budget we cut as much as possible. We're leaving it to the selectmen to look through everything. Again, if it feels like we're redoing this again, but if there are departments that you want to meet with to discuss the cuts that they made, or you know, whether you think there's more that should be cut or less that should be cut, we can certainly go through and have those meetings with the departments again. The other side of this is the revenue. We projected a cut of 5% for the state aid, which is about $410,000. And at this point, we're pretty much, just get the right number for you.
Is that summarized something? Do you have a summary of the revenue and expenses? And I'm having trouble. My computer's not showing if there are multiple tabs, so I'm not.
Yep. So there's a second tab that's called revenue. So it gives you the total expenses that are plugged in on that first tab, and then the total revenues that I have listed on the revenue tab. And so basically we have all of our revenues, you know, your tax levy is at the top. We were able to up our new growth slightly based on some numbers that came back from the assessor to 250,000. We have the total of state revenue, which we've cut by $410,000. We've kept our local receipts the same. The only change is for the water, and that's because the water is similar to an enterprise fund where they always have the revenues meet their expense budget. And the reason why I kept that level, I know some towns are considering cutting their local receipts in anticipation that people may not pay their motor vehicle excise tax. We're looking at waiving penalties and interest on taxes, so that could have an impact. All of those, we have various lines that are listed there that are all that could be impacted if people are not able to make payments, or if people are not going out and getting licenses or permits or fines. So I kept it the same because we tend to have a buffer in that. We're conservative with that that group. We've upped it to be closer in line to the total that we normally get, but we still have a small buffer, which is helpful because the DOR wants to make sure that you're not getting too close and you don't have that buffer, and then you could be upside down. But I think that our buffer is good enough that we don't need to lower our estimate. Obviously, if you'd like to do that, we can make that change. But I left it level because of that. And then the other items are receipts reserved from EMS, which is about the same number as last year. And they're essentially paying for a portion of their budget and for the debt for the ambulance. Water surplus is giving $50,000, and that's for their reserve fund this year. And then you see the other revenues are sewer enterprise, which is balancing its budget, and golf enterprise, which is balancing its budget, and then the cable receipts reserved, which is balancing its budget. So the revenues we're looking at right now, negative 365,000 about, which is not terrible considering that 410,000 that we're not getting from state aid would have If we didn't have to cut that, we would be even. So if we needed to level fund this budget, we would use free cash. If you look at the next tab, the use of free cash, we start with the $1,039,000. I have a few articles on the warrant that obviously have to be approved, but they're prior year bills. So they're only about $5,500. So our total free cash that would be available for balancing the budget is $1,033,000. And if we use the current amount, which again could change, of $365,000, we'd be left with $667,000 left that I would suggest rolling into next year. We don't move it into stabilization, we let it roll. It would be available free cash for us in the fall. And again, the goal of this is we keep as much cash as we can to help try to support us. So, ideally this all ends soon, and we don't have this worry, and we can have a fall town meeting and use the money as we need to at that point. But if this continues longer than expected, or the state cuts more than 5%, we have a buffer that we've saved and built into our budget for next year. So that's kind of a quick glimpse into what I gave you. You can also see our stabilization total currently is a little over $3 million. Overlay, I gave you an update just from the end of the year last year because we're still getting our tax payments in. So I can't give you a more updated version until all of the tax payments come in, which now is pushed out to the end of June. The sewer fund balance that was certified by the DOR in the Gulf and water. So just so you have those balances and you can refer to them if you need to.
So Roger, if I could ask a question, Julie, it looks like a deficit as we stand currently with the school at 2% above 365,000, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. It's tough to use free cash where levels we're at for free cash, but we'll have to see what we can do. And the board is charged with looking at the budgets and seeing where else we could come up with some money, if at all, any place, and see where we end up after that exercise. So we'll do what we can and see where we go.
So let me ask this question, Ms. Hebert. So you're assuming the school department's able to cut their budget. What dollar impact does that have on them?
What I plugged in for an estimate that you see here is a 2% increase over last year.
And they were asking for like a 5, weren't they?
They were originally asking for like 5.6, yeah. So obviously it's a hit for them. It's a hit for us, it's a hit for them. They have a difficult time because they are majority salaries.
Yeah, yep.
So a lot of their budget is made up of contractual salaries that they have no flexibility over. But, Kristen and Paula, they've been working diligently to try to see what they can maneuver and how we can make cuts that will, help us reach our budget goal here. So.
Yeah, my just general comment, when we started this exercise, I mean, obviously there's 3 of us, so I won't speak for the group, but I'd really rather not cut jobs in this process. So I think let's communicate to the school department that we want to know what the impact of this exercise is on them. And, we should talk again before we start eliminating positions from the school department, because, we're in a very unusual time that hopefully is not going to last forever. And we've got money in free cash, we've got money in stabilization, and which we used to call the rainy day fund. And if it's ever been raining, it's now. So before we start jobs, I'd like to revisit that. Mr. Grosch.
Yeah, I just have one question, Julie. In the revenue section, we're keeping the revenue for the course as kind of the same number from last year to this year.
Yeah.
So that could still have a variable to it, right? Because
Right.
the course hasn't opened up yet, and we don't know when it is going to open up.
That's correct. Yeah. So the enterprise funds have to, they're self-supporting of their expense budget. So On the revenue side, the total that you see there equals the total that you'll see in the expense side. They made cuts as well. You know, they did as best they could, and they are very cognizant of the fact that you know, DOR obviously when you set your budget and you try to get your tax recap set, the DOR looks at what you're projecting for revenues and they make you justify it. So there's one piece of the pie. But the other piece is that the golf, they're very cognizant of what they're spending and in comparison to what they're taking in. So if their budget gets approved by the DOR, if they can prove that they should be able to meet that revenue, which obviously will be a little more difficult in this kind of an atmosphere, they are very good about, you know, we have a slow period of time, we haven't had as many golfers, so we can't be spending money. They'll put a freeze on what they're doing to make sure that they're not in a hole. So they've been very, very good at that.
Good.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Gasper, go.
while we're talking about, well, on the conversation of golf, to hit Mr. DeRoche's point where their revenues are, you know, they're doing their best project what they can, Mr. DeRoche. And I think even the current year that we're in right now with the shortfall, because we're opening up late, no matter how we want to look at this, we're losing a few weeks of golf. You know, whatever they're making in extra revenue now is probably going to take a hit. They could come up with a loss for this year, depending on how we reopen and how many golfers want to come out and golf. So, you know, it's just, they're just projecting as best as they can. And I think next year is going to be a very difficult year if we don't try to get back to some kind of normalcy, right? And, you know, Roger, I just want to make one broad comment to the board and to everybody else that's watching this is when we talk about the rainy day fund, and I get that, but we really need to be cognizant of what we're doing and how much money we're using for budgetary reasons from stabilization, because sooner or later, when that infection gets inside of the budget process, you're not getting rid of that money year over year. It keeps compounding at a rate where there's no return. So we got to be very cognizant of what we're doing and what we're going to be spending money on, and stabilization in the free cash levels we're at now, I believe would be more so lean towards one-time expenditures. So we have to be very cognizant of what we're doing as far as budgetary items for the future impact of the budgets down the road.
Yep. No, I you know, respect those comments, Mr. Gasper. I just think we're in a very unusual time. I think we're in very unusual circumstances. It's taking us, you know, how old's the town? A couple hundred years old.
160.
200 years to save the money that we got, and
160.
don't want to blow it all in one year, but in very unusual circumstances.
I understand.
I think just I mean, the general comment is my mind is open to, you know, we need to look at things differently this year, and I don't have any conclusions yet other than to say, you know, let's understand that we've got some very unusual circumstances going on here, and let's not set ourselves down on a path forever based on what's happening this one year. I think, you know, we need to be careful about what we do this year, and we need to, you know, I just don't want to be cutting people's jobs and impacting town operations or school operations based on something that may be gone in 6 months. So,
Your point is well taken, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hebert, back, and I think a general comment, we should try to set Ms. Hebert, could you just talk about a timeline for finalizing the budget and when we need to do this? And, you know, I think we as a group have acknowledged we need to spend more time looking through these numbers. When should we target for getting this approved and voting on the budget for finalization?
I mean, your town meeting right now is June 22nd. Ideally, maybe the end of May,
So we've got
beginning of June, to have it finalized, and you could put it out to print and post it. You generally need, I think it's 15 days.
Yes, 15 days.
15?
Yes.
So, I mean, beginning of June would be your end all, where it has to be voted on and posted, and you know, you have to have all the notice requirements completed. I mean, you can plan whatever meetings, like you said, if you want to have certain departments come in to discuss the budget changes that they've made. articles that, I know you guys just got them for the first time today, so once you look them over, articles that you want to have brought in front of you to decide if you want them on the final warrant. I mean, ultimately, there's 4 Tuesdays in May, and then one at the beginning of June, so you have plenty of
Good time.
time.
We have time.
Mr.
I
Chairman?
would to my, to the other selectmen, just, the budget numbers, let's try to get through the budgets and get comfortable, understand what's proposed, and the articles as well, and let's come in every time with some, creative questions and comments, and try to get this toward finalization. If there are departments that we think we need to bring in, let's do that. But we've got, 4 weeks effectively to get this done, and we need to get it done. Eventually, we will have a town meeting. Eventually, we will have a budget, hopefully.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Gasper, go.
I just don't want Ms. Hebert or Ms. Leonard to forget that we need time to go to print as well. We discussed that. We have 15 days for posting the warrant by law. And then I know that we talked about this in the past, Ms. Hebert, that we need some time, and Ms. Leonard, we need some time to go to print and make sure it comes back and it's right? So we need to, once we go to print, is what I'm saying, is we all know last year there was made, and we want to be able to allow ourselves, including Ms. Hebert, some time for review in the department heads. I think this year we'll go through a different exercise, Mr. Chairman, is maybe once we get it printed, we'll give it to all our department heads to make sure that everything that's been printed is correct. That's under their responsibility, so that we're not trying to scramble and read the whole thing ourselves.
We want to, I could target May 19th. We've got a meeting scheduled. Do we have a meeting on the 19th? We have a meeting scheduled for the night of the 19th that we want to schedule to target that night as the night we should have our final budget vote. So that gives us basically 4 weeks, a month.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Roger. I think the sooner the better.
Let's set that goal with each other.
I think the most important thing for this board to be doing in this time is to make sure that we have the budget done for Ms. Hebert, and she can move on to doing other things. She can feel comfortable making sure that everything's being done and done right. So the sooner we could do it, the better off, allowing us some time with the articles. I think that we've exhausted ourselves in talking about articles. I think it's only the necessities that will be funded this year, and keeping some of those reserves for any kind of shortfall we may experience in the future. Hopefully there'll be none, especially experiencing the deficit that we're still looking at. Hopefully, I know Ms. Hebert's put a 5% on it, and reduction of 405 or 410,000, Ms. Hebert, but we're at 365. So, hey, with any luck, the state's going to say we're not cutting you 5%, and they'll eat the burden of that 65, right? I think that's where we're looking at. I know that we'll look through the budget and glimpsing through those budgets. I've had my eye on a couple of things I was looking to see if would be cut. I'm pleased to announce that those departments have cut those items. So, I think it's going to be a tough practice. I think everybody's gone through the budgets and done a pretty good job of looking at their own budgets and saying, this is about as much as I can give up. And it'll be the board's decision to look at them again and make recommendations amongst ourselves at that meeting to say, can we cut this budget further? And at least allow Ms. Hebert a 1-week period to talk to the department heads instead of trying to bring them into a Zoom meeting and saying, this is what the board would like you to cut. Is that possible? And if not, why again?
Let's, again, we'll set that date of May 19th, but let's leave this on this will be on every agenda going forward between now and the 19th. Let's carry this forward, and let's plan to come in. If either of you have departments you'd like to bring in to talk about budgets or articles or whatever, or, let's leave that on. We can have an open discussion about any budget item between now and May 19th, but let's target May 19th as the date we take a final vote on this budget, okay?
Excellent.
Very good.
Yep.
And I'd like to add too, if there are any departments that you do want to discuss the budgets with and you want me to have them come into one of our meetings, let me know and I can set that up as well.
And let me, to the other two selectmen, encourage you to, Ms. Hebert, anything related to the budget, call her, and Ms. Hebert, put it on the agenda. If they want to see any department in, obviously some sense of what the timeline is and how much, meeting time we have, but if either Mr. Gasper or Mr. DeRoche would like a department on the agenda, let's just add it to the agenda and let's get them in.
Okay, very good.
Okay?
Yep, that works.
All right, anything else on the fiscal 21 budget?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Gasper?
if it's at all possible, seeing how we have limitations, I mean, if it's at all possible, I agree with that exercise that you just laid forth, but if it's at all possible, if we can get to the budgets, I know I'll be working on them right away. I'm sure that you two gentlemen will do the same thing, knowing how the importance of getting this process done and over with so that we can breathe a little bit here and not feel like we're under the gun for town meeting or anything like that. Maybe again that we can just let Ms. Hebert know through an email saying this is a concern number for me in X, Y, and Z budget. Can you talk to the department head and see if they have any more leeway? And maybe Ms. Hebert can work that with the department heads prior, so the next meeting when we come in, we could already have that resolved and saying that these cuts can't be made. And I just don't want to try to get every week we're going to have 2 or 3 people trying to join into the Zoom meeting and carrying these meetings on for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, no, either do I.
I think Ms. Hebert can handle this in the background. So, I think that, we look over the numbers. We know what we need to close as a gap. Being cognizant again of what the school department's needs are and trying to do our very best and not cutting any positions. Absolutely, Roger. I agree with that. But let's see what we come up with, and maybe we don't come up with nothing. But I would just like the board to be able to communicate with Ms. Hebert and saying, this is where I'd like to cut. Is that something that we can do? Can you ask X, Y, and Z if it's okay for the board to look at that cut?
The only agreed. The only request I would have is that all of those are communicated to everyone, so that we've now got a draft of the budget, and that any changes to that document from this point forward,
Absolutely.
we're aware of what those changes are, rather than just having numbers changed in the budget and we don't know that that's happened. So
Right.
Yeah, that's why I said
unilaterally reaching out to departments and saying, hey, change that line item, that anything, that those conversations are all fine, certainly, but all of those discussions and all of those changes are brought back to the full body.
Absolutely. That's why I was asking for Ms. Heber to do it, because she can communicate that through an email to all the members of the board saying, this is what Mr. Gasper brought up, this is what Mr. Cabral brought up, and we can have that ahead of time for discussion at our next meeting to discuss those cuts.
Okay, perfect. Anything else on the fiscal 21 budget or articles? Item 3 is the Kearsarge PPA. Ms. Hebert, you've got an update there. We're close to a final document.
Yeah, so as you know from last week, we had a couple items that Kearsarge had questioned, and we were going back and forth. Town council looked at everything. We sent it back to them, and they were agreeable to our changes that we had. So as far as town council, there were no other issues that we had in making the contract agreeable on our side. So if the board so chooses to accept the provisions, I'll get the final version out to you so it can be signed, but those 2 issues that we had are no longer issues. They've been resolved.
And there's an email that from Kopelman and Page pushed back on some of the changes they wanted. I think we got our way in both cases. Is that?
Yeah.
Confused about some of the back and forth, but it looks like Kopelman and Page pushed back on some of the changes that Kopelman and Page wanted, that Kearsarge had initially rejected, and it seems we got what we wanted with those changes. So yeah. I think the agreement's good, and I'm going to say that the issues were more legal issues than business issues. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
I think we've got a good document, so I don't know if it would be appropriate to vote that document now, or if you'd like to look at it one last time. But I don't think that, again, the open items were issues that are necessarily things that are important to us.
Mr. Cabral, I read through that document with the changes, and it says town council, I think it was Attorney Holland that replied to that. He seemed to think that one of them, if they didn't make the change, it was null and voids basically the whole contract. So I didn't get.
I think we got our way. I think we got our way on that.
Yeah. I didn't see that update then. I don't know when that came in, but I just read one today earlier in this morning. Morning.
It came back a little while ago. Yeah, it was probably around 2.
All right, so I didn't see that.
See that one either.
We sent it back to Kearsarge and told them that, you know, we couldn't accept the change as our town council outlined, and they said that they were fine with keeping it the way we wanted it. So we got our, you know, as Mr. Cabral said, we got our way on both of the 2 items. So
I think Mr. Gasper, your impression's correct. You might have seen the most recent email. It was Kopelman and Page saying, you know, basically the whole thing's, and I'm going to pick the wrong word, but if we give you that, you really invalidate, you know, an issue to us, and we can't give you that. And
Yeah, it just seemed really funky, and there was some language about selling credits to another municipality. So, I mean, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just read through it, and then I think I don't know if town council came back with a response saying, all right, we'll incorporate that in the original agreement and fix that language and things of that nature, or is it just okay the way that draft was made up? So I just want to make sure it's all legit and town council gives its final seal of approval.
Yeah, let's just, if we could, Ms. Hebert, let's get the final document. And let's plan on getting it signed at our next meeting.
okay.
All right, let's get something in final form so we can see what final form looks like. The references, I've got the email that was sent out today, specific references to paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
So we can, and this email is as of 12:49 p.m. today. We can go from the email to a document where we can see where we ended up. And with that final document, let's plan on voting that next time. Voting and signing that at our next meeting. Is that a?
Were there any other concerns that, you know, I just know Kearsarge has been waiting to have, you know, to see what the board would vote. So if there are any other concerns that you've seen when you look through the contract, let me know so we can get them kind of keyed out and have that final version for you all to look through before the next meeting.
I think I'm with the chairman on this one. Basically, town council's done everything they needed to do to their document. I mean, I was concerned with their concerns as well as I think the board members were. I think once those 2 or 3 concerns were addressed, we're good to sign.
Perfect.
Could we, I mean, we're not meeting for 2 weeks. I know Kearsarge has been, could we get that final form of agreement out and maybe we could, no, I guess we need to vote to accept it before we can sign it, right?
Mr. Chairman, you want to vote tonight, Mr. Chairman, pending changes made by town council approval?
I mean, I'm fine. Actually, I'm fine with what's going on. I'd like to move it forward. So, but I, like to reserve your rights to make changes once you see the final version. So, could we approve the contract subject to, the opportunity to hold it if you see any concerns?
Just in reference, I know the original document had 12%. We've changed that to 15%.
That's changed. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that was the big one. That's a business.
All right.
That's the one I saw. Yeah.
Oh.
And it also, early reference was to a facility in New Bedford. We wanted to buy Acushnet electricity.
Correct.
Those are the kinds of little changes I catch. But the stuff in there is not things I would have focused on. The stuff the attorneys are back and forth on. So, when do you think we could get that final version, Ms. Hebert?
I mean, tomorrow morning, I'm sure.
Could we? Why don't we vote to approve the contract? In final form, today's by Monday, assuming nobody's so you've got most of a week and, the coming weekend. If you've got objections, please express them by Monday. Otherwise, we'll assume that our vote is final and we're signing that contract. Is that fair?
It's fair.
Yep.
Can I get a motion to that? Can I get a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
I'll second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. And get Kopelman Page a clean version of the contract, get it around so we can all look at it. ASAP would be good because we want to have time to review the changes that are proposed.
Okay.
And my agenda is now on. Nope, I got it. Right. Nope, it's on again. Bear with me for a second. I'll get there. Okay, town administrator goals and objectives. We've got, I'll just read them to the group, and this is the result of all of us. This is the result of all of our input, and these are what we've listed as our top focus issues. Coronavirus, obviously. PJ Keating, also obviously. And comment if on any of these if you want, but this is, just big picture. This is just big picture items. A town meeting to manage the town's finances so that any shortfall in revenues will not be made up by the taxpayers of the town as a percentage of the tax levy. Right now, it is roughly 53% of the tax levy paid by taxpayers. This number should be maintained as best as possible. A reasonable goal, that's on all of us as well to, to make sure we, we stay within those parameters. But that seems reasonable to set that as a benchmark of where we are right now. Next one, maintain free cash to nothing less than $800,000. That one's, again, a benchmark. I think that one's a little harder because we've been trying to manage our budget so that free cash by design is as low as possible. So if if we come in with a free cash number of $300,000, the town administrator's done a great job of producing a very accurate budget, but there's no free cash as a result of that. So this
That's not what that says, Rob.
maintain
It says maintain free cash level at $800,000. So right now we have 1.039, as Ms. Hebert talked about, and I said at the joint meeting we had with the school department finance committee. And, I put this 800,000 number, the DOR, I think Ms. Hebert will agree that the DOR says a community of our size, 1 million is a comfortable number in free cash year over year to maintain that level of free cash year over year. I actually brought it down 20% because of the circumstances that we may be in this year to balance the budget with some of free cash. So I actually took that down 20%. And I gave some leeway there for added budgetary expenses without crippling, the town and always having an amount of money for free cash for capital purchases, in other words.
It isn't, if the budget was, if we could very accurately budget every line item in the budget, our free cash would be zero.
No.
It would be your expense budget and your revenues.
Revenue budget. If we could very accurately budget all of those numbers, which we want to do, we want to be as accurate as possible, our free cash number would be zero. And I get that there's always, we can't 100% get every number right. So there's always going to be free cash, but I'm just pointing out the fact that targeting free cash at a level encourages inaccuracies in budgeting so I don't object to the fact that it's good to have a free cash number, but it's sort of encouraging, let's be a little loose in our budgeting as well.
That's not what I so that was one of mine, Roger. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I mean, we want to keep the $1 million. I get it. But in these uncertain times where the numbers are moving around so much, we talked about the school department doing their best with all things that they're dealing with, and the rest of us that are managing this side of town are dealing with. It's tough. And, we got to be realistic with ourselves saying, to maintain that $1 million that the DOR wants us to maintain year over year, it just might not be accomplishable. So I'm taking 20% off that number. I'm not saying we're going to spend it, Roger. It's given us, the board, a little flexibility, especially in this year, to say, okay, I'm not trying to give her unrealistic goals and saying, all right, I want $1 million and we only got $39,000 to spend from free cash. What I've done is I've allowed a buffer there, and it's not for everybody to come in and think that we can just, provide loose budgets. That's not what we're doing. It's the Board of Selectmen that'll be watching free cash and monitoring it along with the town administrator and the town accountant saying, no, we're not willing to spend that kind of free cash because we're getting to dangerous levels where we're not going to have anything to buy capital goods in the future.
Yeah. And I know no matter what we do, we're always going to have free cash. We will always have free cash, hopefully.
I hope so.
I'll go to you next, Mr. Drost. The only The only comment I'd make is it's difficult to set a standard. It's difficult to, in my opinion, I think we need to be, free cash is $750,000. It's more like she's done a good job than she's done a bad job, would be the only comment. Mr. DeRoche.
Well, the comment I have for this conversation is we were just presented an adjusted budget, and under free cash, total to be used to fund budget $365,000. So that's going to leave us down to 667. So we're making some assumptions other than have nothing less than 800,000. We're already kind of got an idea that it's going to be 667, or at least that's what was proposed in the budget.
I think this is looking at the $1 million number is what this is.
Yeah, that's
$1
correct.
million number that this is targeting.
Mr. DeRoche, that's the reason why I did this, is because I know that we're going to have to use something for free cash this year, but I'm not willing to accept using $400,000 of free cash at this point unless we absolutely need to. So that's why we're reviewing budgets, seeing where else we can make cuts to reduce the deficit. That's all.
Well, we're gonna.
So is this? Are you saying certified free cash or free cash to balance the budget? Because those are two different things. Free cash used to balance the budget, or free cash certified at the end of the year?
I'm saying we need to maintain the certified free cash that we have, the $1 million. That's what the DOR says.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay, all right.
Yeah, same thing that you're talking about, Roger.
Okay.
I understand that we may need to substitute. Look, the reality of it is if we stick with Ms. Hebert's 5% that we're going to assume that the government's going to cut us, the state government's going to cut us, we're going to have to do something. And that's fine, but we're hoping next year that those revenues will come back and we can replenish that free cash. So it's a 1 year offset, and maybe we replenish and we're back to a good amount of free cash again next year. I just don't want to go gangbusters spending it all for budgetary reasons.
Ms. Hebert, any comments on that? This is making this your goal. Any comments on that?
So we have this, it's actually in our financial policies and procedures that we put out at least in advance of September, because I know this is part of our phone call for Standard & Poor's when we got our credit rate increase. This is a goal that the DOR likes to see, as Kevin mentioned. They look at a certain percentage of your budget that should be certified as free cash. Which for us, it's between, I think, 800,000 and 1.2 million as the target area. So, that is a goal, a financial goal that we have in our policies. I would hope to be able to maintain that, and I would hope, obviously, if extenuating circumstances like a pandemic come about, and it's harder to hit that level or hit that goal, it's taken with a little bit of caution from the Board of Selectmen, but that's something that I typically strive for anyway.
Okay, all right. Next one's the meals tax. Hoping we can look at that again and consider that for our OPEB liability. That's one I suggested. I know that was not well received at the last town meeting it was presented at, but I think it's everybody else seems to be doing it. I think we're missing an opportunity for some revenue. So I just thought that was something we should, this is not to be approved tonight, but something I think we should at least consider and talk about again. The Comcast renewal, I'm 3 years on the Board of Selectmen. When I first joined, I went on the cable committee and told I was going to be doing the Comcast, the renewal of the Comcast contract. My first thought was we're bringing Verizon in. I learned that it's not that simple. 3 years later, we still haven't, that's still not done. So I think we need to get that contract done. Employment policies, these two have been merged, but we started an employee manual, which we all looked at and we sent off to Copeland and Page for review, and it disappeared into the void. So I think we need a good employment manual. We've got employees. I think we need an employment manual. So that's out there. Wage and classification, I think we need to we've got it, we've implemented it. I think we need to maintain it. There needs to be a roll forward of the wage scales. We need to make sure our employees are on the wage scales. And I think that's something to charge Ms. Hebert with maintaining that all happens. Lake Street, I think you know the Lake Street. Mr. DeRoche, I know that's important to you as well as me.
Yeah.
New Bedford said they were going to, they were on it, they were looking at solutions, and then the world changed dramatically. So I reached out to them again. I got, director of their DPW, call themselves something else, but he assured me that they were considering options to deal with the problems at Lake Street and then COVID-19. So I don't feel like now's not a good time to call them. Sewer expansion, CWMP, that should proceed at some pace, whatever the appropriate pace is, but we've got a detailed report, and we need to decide how we implement that, if we implement it, where we go, what we do. This one's a big one, town bylaw review. I think we need to look at our bylaws. I think there are some things in our bylaws that really need to be reconsidered, really need to be brought up to current standards. And again, some of these are near-term goals. Some of them are long, the Comcast renewal is a near-term goal. The town bylaw review, the CWMP, is a longer-term goal. But I think as a board, we need both of those. We need to look toward the future and say, where do we want to be? And we need to focus our town administrator on where we want to be. And that was the purpose of this exercise. So this is a consolidation of the list the three of us submitted. And, I think we should probably vote on this, seeing as Ms. Hebert's contract requires that we lay out goals and objectives for her. If we're going to adopt these as her goals and objectives, I think it's appropriate for the board to vote them. So is there anything that you don't believe should be in here?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Casper?
So I seen the meals tax was back on here, and I was an opponent of it in the past on town meeting floor, and the residents voted against it. I just think that this year, I understand the concept of it and all of that stuff. We've been through this. I don't need to be educated again on it. I just think that in this troubling time with our restaurants, all the unknowns with our restaurants, trying to get people back into these local establishments, I don't think that the board needs to be voting this, at least not at this town meeting.
No. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just to push this now and make life more difficult on these restaurants and trying to get themselves back up and acclimated, and hopefully, and I'll use that term loosely, hopefully all of these restaurants that we have, the 3, 4, 5 that we have in town, I'm hopeful that they can come back to where they were, their business book was, in the past. I don't know if that's going to be the case over the next 12 months. None of us do, right? I just don't want to make it harder for these people to be focusing on something else other than running their business. That's all.
This isn't, I will just say, when I look at the meals tax, I don't consider that a June 2020 issue. I consider that something that the Board of Selectmen should revisit when it's appropriate. Not intended as something for this town meeting, probably not something intended for the October town meeting, but just something that I wanted here because I don't think we should lose sight of. I think it's an important revenue source, potential revenue source for the town. I think it's a revenue source that all of the towns around us have. And for that reason, I think it's something that we shouldn't forget about. That's why I wanted it on here.
Okay.
Like the CWMP. I'm not, suggesting that that's something we should bring to the June town meeting. We're not ready to do that, but I'm going off the board in June. But just trying to lay out some things that I think the Board of Selectmen should be conscious of, and this time next year, it may be something because we've got it on the list that Julie brings it forward and the board says, no, we don't want to do that. It's not a good time. But I do feel it's something that should be considered by the board at some future time, which is why it's, not trying to push an agenda or push something quickly, but let's not forget about it either. Like lakes, like all of them, like their longer term goals.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I just don't want to I don't want to be putting stuff on paper and occupying Ms. Hebert's time with thinking that she needs to get these kind of things done right away to suffice these goals and objectives. I mean, you know, I'll say the same thing about the CWMP. I was the biggest proponent of the CWMP back in 2016. And I'll say this, that's really up to the taxpayers in town meeting on whether or not we can advance that. The only way that we advance that is through town meeting, not by a vote by the Board of Selectmen. Obviously, it takes that to have a town meeting. But, you know, again, we have no idea what kind of economical impact this virus is going to have. Hopefully, this thing just gets the hell away from us and never comes back. But I can't answer that question. None of us can. So, hey, if it's a realistic goal, maybe we do in the fall. Look, I'm looking forward to, I hope that this economy does well. And I hope that this is something that we can move, because I think, you know, when I was advocating for the CWMP, it's the only way that we can bring business into the community, right? So no business is going to want to come to Acushnet if they don't have sewer, and they can't really, for that matter. They would need a ginormous septic system. So that was part of the scope of it back in 2016. Is to allow that to, because we're 90% dependent on residential property taxes. So it's something I won't forget about. It's something that's always in the back of my mind. And I think when the time's ready, we'll be asking the board to, you know, let's make a presentation and let's move this thing to a town meeting so that we can either get a yay or a nay and see what parts of town we can go with, right? And there'll be a couple of attempts at it. We might do one phase and it not pass, and the board might decide in the next, say, 6 months or a year, we might say, let's do the south end of town over here, because that's the next critical phase, and give them a shot and see if they want to approve it. We don't know what the circumstances are with these folks. Let's just, you know, it's just something I don't want to burden Miss Hebert with, that's all.
Yeah. But the purpose of having it on the list is to
not forget about it.
Not forget about, and I think we do need to advance it. I think the Department of Public Works is trying to figure out a way to bring this forward, and to look at, you know, priority area 2, priority area 1, and figure out how we advance the project in those areas. And I think we need to keep it on our radar. We spent a lot of money, and granted, the Board of Selectmen doesn't approve it, but we need a plan to bring it before the residents of the town.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I would say in a rather short timeline, we need to start this moving, not to approve it, but to give people the option of voting to have sewer in their neighborhoods.
Yep.
And that's why this is here. And when at town meeting, the residents may say, no, too expensive, we don't want it. But as a town administrator, as a Board of Selectmen, this group's done its job, which is to give the residents the option of making that decision. So
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
So in general, are we okay with this list then?
I'm good. I'm good with it as long as we all have the same basic understanding of it.
Yep.
Yeah, in general, it's a great outline to start and give us a direction for an upcoming year. So
year and beyond. This is a Miss Hebert's going to be with the town until she retires, and this will lay for that 40-year path for her. So,
if you want, I can kind of subsection them out too. So we have like shorter range goals and longer range goals.
mm-hmm.
Just so, you know, kind of to clarify the point that you're making, that some of them are, you know, more long-term. I can at least separate them out so you can see that separation.
Yeah, you can basically do it in 2 halves if I'm looking at the list. I mean, you know, Roger talked about the Comcast renewal. That was supposed to be done in November. We were close. Town council was supposed to be reviewing that document, which is, you know, a book this big red document. Never heard anything back on that. So, I mean, you can move that up, get something in writing and make sure it's signed so that we have an agreement with them. I think we're just kind of working under an MOU, right, Raj?
On which?
On the Comcast renewal right now, it's just kind of.
I think there's a draft agreement out there that's.
Yeah,
I think there's just a draft agreement out there. I don't even know where it is. We hired a special attorney to negotiate it for us. And where is it?
There's some paperwork that you guys will have on an upcoming agenda to approve basically the minutes of the hearing, the ascertainment hearing that we had back in December. I think, beginning of December. So that's the first step. There's a memo that goes along with it from town council. And then the next step would be reviewing that gigantic book as Mr. Gasper pointed out. Town
got
council
that.
gone through it, provided some areas that we can look through and clarify, whatever areas were significant to him, and then we can vote it. So it should be, should be coming up soon, and we should be able to clear through it soon, but so much other stuff has kind of come on in the meantime.
Ms. Hebert, did town council actually review? I mean, Rogers alluded to, we hired somebody special to do this. So, I mean, I guess, again, Roger, it goes back to the same thing with the Kearsarge. None of us are rocket scientists, so that's why we pay town council to do these kind of things for the board, and we approve it in concept, that we know the basic general ideas of what the contract's doing. But, you didn't read the book, let's be honest. I didn't read that book, let's be honest. I don't think Mr. DeRoche read that book. It's like
The cable book?
The cable.
that red and white one. That's an
Yeah, I did. When I first went on, I skimmed it, but then there are sections, I don't have to read that. There's
right. So I guess my question is, if town council reviewed it, Roger, and whoever did this document for us, they went back and forth. Julie just talked about a couple of documents where there was some discrepancies, i.e. what we just dealt with in Kearsarge agreement. Give us that and make sure it's been corrected, and, off we hop.
Yep. How much are you going to pay us? That's what, what's.
Right, what the percentage was.
What are you going to send to it? What are you going to send? That's what we care about, right? Okay, we can't have Verizon. We're stuck with Comcast. Okay.
Right.
Right, what's the number?
What's the number? That's so. All right. So we got 10 points here. Could I get a motion to approve these 10 points as short and long-term goals for Ms. Hebert as our town administrator?
So moved.
Second, Mr. DeRoche.
Yeah, I'll second.
Further discussion?
Aye.
Favor?
I'll second. Aye. Yeah, sorry.
Aye. Thank you. All right. Back to the agenda. Soil board permit update. Anybody want a discussion on that at this point?
Well, the select board now has the soil permit in front of them. Well, what are we gonna do?
Roger, I've read through, I don't know if you guys can you see this page that was given to us?
Yeah.
It's basically, it says at the top of the page, it says acknowledgement. It's number 9, acknowledgement sheet.
Are you on the soil board permit?
Yes, sir.
Let me get to it.
There's a spreadsheet in there that says acknowledgement at the top, and it goes through all the whereases and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Number 9.
That's like the most important part of the soil board permit, Roger. It's acknowledgements.
Yep, let me get to it. Yeah, I got it here, yes.
Okay. So I guess my biggest question again, and I've read through this, and I've actually been doing all my research on what the 310 CMR 7 subsection 7.011 and all that 9-1. If you look at the first line in the acknowledgement spreadsheet, it says, whereas the Soil Conservation Board of the Town of Acushnet, the board, would like to ensure that PJ Keating operates its facility at 72 South Main Street in a manner which satisfies the goals of Article 11 of the town bylaws.
Article 6.
I'm sorry, Article 6, it's correct. So Article 6, so if you go to Article 6 in the bylaw book, it's basically the soil conservation for the town of Acushnet, correct?
I'm assuming we've got the correct reference yet. I haven't checked.
Well,
Assuming that's a correct reference.
Earth removal procedure.
No. Article 6 is not the earth removal, Mr. DeRoche. I mean, hold on a second before
Section 3.
It says Article 6 is soil conservation for the town of Acushnet, Section 1, and it goes through all of the stuff. Earth removal, it's part of that same thing, yes, Mr. DeRoche. Section 3 is earth removal. So anyways, when we asked this question to town council, and I don't believe that we ever received the answer, but he was sitting over in the chair over here, and we asked, I asked the question of what are they grandfathered as far as our bylaws go? And
they are anymore.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I don't think they are I don't think they are grandfathered anymore. I think town council's taken the opinion that when that property was rezoned to industrial, any grandfather claim disappeared with that change to industrial zoning. So I think we've got an opinion from town council that they are no longer. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You think I'm just confused because there's basically a letter on page, if we're doing that and we're referencing that, on page 17 in the bylaw book, section 4, letter C, it's basically null and void for everything that's inside of the soil board permit, because it says earth removal activities and lawful operation on any parcel of land at the time of this bylaw is adopted may continue unless and until abandoned for more than 12 consecutive months. So I'm a little disturbed on reading that. And, you know, I guess I never got the answer on whether or not, you know, I think he alluded to what you said, Roger, that they're not grandfathered to anything, but, you know, I think that first line in the soil permit really dictates everything. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff I've read through, and it covers a broad spectrum of regulations, so I think it's really good. You know, albeit I didn't read every single regulation, but I've been reading a lot of these regulations, so I think that this does a lot compared to what we were doing before. And I think, you know, I look at this, and the reason why I brought up that one line at the top of the acknowledgement page, is the first line, and it references the Article 6 of our bylaws, is because there's a lot of stuff that's in our bylaws under Article 6 that they're not doing.
I know.
So I'm a little bit aggravated. I guess I'll use that terminology for anybody that wants to watch this at home, in whether it's the company or not. I really don't care, but it's just, you read our bylaws, and, you know, I think Chief Gallagher said at the public hearing, the initial public hearing, that it's no fault of the Board of Selectmen because nobody's ever brought it to our attention while we were renewing these soil board permits. And, you know, I think to that detriment, I mean, if some of this stuff was, you know, brought up in the past, maybe we would have did a better job of looking at these bylaws. But since, you know, Roger, we did this 2 years ago down at the Council on Aging, it really opened up the light to all of us, and we all agreed, let's do this and let's do it right. And, you know, I like what I see in the soil board permit now with these statutes that are in here. But, you know, I guess I go back to the first line. If they're not grandfathered in, well, we got some significant issues that we need to have resolved by PJ Keating before issuing this permit. I hate to say it, guys, but I made a note of just one thing, and outside of me saying that everything looks really good except for a couple other things, when I did this, I wrote page 20 of the bylaw book. In the one I brought up this point, I believe it was at the original public hearing. On page 20, it says, after the operation has proceeded 600 feet, the operator shall slope grade and reseed the initial 300 feet before or during the period when he begins work on the following 300 feet. Thereafter, he shall proceed to advance his operations at an integral distance of 300 feet while he simultaneously grades, slopes, loams, and reseeds previous integral distance of 300 feet. We got a massive hole in the town of Acushnet. I'm going to go to the next one. So that being aside, is why aren't they filling in that first 300 feet? Because they surpassed 600 a long time ago. And then when you read down, if you guys go down, I only have one other thing that I need to get, Roger, and I don't know if you've seen this or if Julie can help out the board with this, but on number conditions for soil board removal permit, it says comply with all provisions of the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, SWPPP, prepared by PJ Keating. Required as the town of Acushnet Stormwater Review Board of Regulations and Stormwater. I don't have that copy of that. I'm very concerned about the Acushnet River with the hazmat people that are in there working right now. If you jumped in a boat, you'd be able to see it. If you drove through the property that I did, you'd be able to see some gentlemen back there. They're cleaning up the river right now, and they have a hazmat site right off the river. I actually got yelled at for being back there. I didn't know that was a hazmat site. And it's right along with that river from PJ Keating goes into the river. Where all that silt is, you can see it from a Google Earth image. I mean, I'm very concerned about our aquatic reservoir over there, that nobody really gives a damn about that water runoff that's going in there and killing the fish and you know, the aquifers that are there. I think that's one of my biggest concerns outside of human health concerns. I mean, what about, that's said before, that's all regulated under the Water Act, the Federal Water Act. It leads into the Atlantic Ocean. Any perennial spring that leads into the Atlantic Ocean is regulated by the Clean Water Act. So why, I guess now, Roger, is the time to say this, is where the hell has EPA been and DEP been, and looking at that river and saying, whoa, wait a minute, this is not acceptable. So I guess that's my stress with the quarry, is stop contaminating our waterways, right? And I think that to be looked at very hard. The other thing that I noticed on this soil board permit, and I think it needs to be corrected, is, Roger, I talked about this last time, was it says decommissioning plan filed on this page here, the soil board, the original soil board thing.
I've rejected their decommissioning plan.
And so, hold on, Roger, because I don't know if you've seen this yet or not, but it contradicts itself, because it says what they filled out was proposed use of land after earth removal, passive recreation. However, when you go back to the acknowledgement page, you go all the way down to number 3, conditions for soil removal permit, go down to number 3. It says PJ Keating will keep the quarry area free from debris, hazardous materials, and or any waste materials, so that once the quarry has been exhausted of its resources, the area could be used as a potential public drinking water supply.
Yeah, I think that's a pipe dream.
So we have this as saying one thing of a use, and then we have this saying we're going to be building baseball parks in an area that's 300 feet deep.
Yeah, they've generated a plan that they acknowledge is not based in any reality.
Okay.
Really, I mean, I've seen an image. It's like this big. It's too small to read. We can't seem to get a full-size plan. But it shows some soccer fields on the side, and
yeah, I seen it.
So they've given us that image. They've acknowledged that they don't really plan on building those soccer fields, but they've given us a plan showing soccer fields. They may not be soccer fields, but open, seeded, grassy areas. The reservoir would fill with water. But I've never, I want a real rendering. I want something I can see. I want something they really intend to do. They've given us a plan that they've acknowledged they don't really plan on ever doing that. And what is your decommissioning plan when the day comes that you're not working that quarry anymore? What's the value of decommissioning the plan? What is the real value of doing it? And,
I know.
And give us a bond in that amount. The $1 million.
I know. I seen the $1 million, and that could be argued, I guess, too, right?
Wholly insufficient. The fire chief, went to their plan, sort of estimated what it would cost to put a fence around the facility, and basically calculated that $1 million wouldn't cover the cost of putting a fence around it.
Wow.
The $1 million isn't enough. They've never really taken that decommissioning plan seriously. They've tried to put it back on us to develop the decommissioning plan, and we shouldn't be doing that. It's their job to give us a plan. It's our job to accept or reject it. I mean, I'll go through some other things that I think could be attached to this soil board permit. I don't know when. I know why it's done, but 24/7 operations. I mean, when did they ever get permission to operate all night long, especially with this asphalt plant up on South Main Street now? I mean, and it's not just the asphalt plant, it's traffic through the entire length of town. I've talked to residents on Main Street that complain about, trucks carrying material all night long running up and down Main Street. So it's all of Acushnet that's impacted by this hub that is PJ Keating attracting vehicles all night long. If the asphalt plant's going to be up on the road, maybe a sound barrier, maybe a visual barrier. The one thing that's good in the sound, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a health agent out there on a regular basis to look at the facility. We do know we've got dust problems. And that's part of what the health agent's going to be doing. So I'm concerned about sound off of that facility right up on the street. So I think those are the things that need to be in this in the soil board permit, and maybe in the license for the new fuel tanks.
I think a lot of that, I think a lot of that is in this acknowledgement page. It's the only other thing. It's got a bunch of different things, noises defined in 310 CMR 7.0. So this page does a few references at the bottom of the page on air pollution. It references the CMR 7.0, and then one line up here on letter, well, it's not, it's just an asterisk where it says the whereas, and it's got the three groups of 310 CMR 7.09, 7.09, and 7.10. On the last one, it says noise is defined in 310 CMR subsection 7. I was reading subsection 7. I think there's some other things that we may want to be adding from subsection 7, and I wrote down a couple of them: combustion efficiency, fuel, including the definition of hazardous waste fuel and used fuel. Recyclable material is one that they are doing over there. And regulating recyclable material. I think that's all under the subsection 7. So I think there's some add-ons that we could do here as another part of this whereas 310 CMR 7.7.
Here's the reality about this whole thing. So we've got it in our bylaw. We've now put it in our soil board permit. Those are all regulations that have been in place for years. The reality is, if we tell them not to do it and they do it anyway, what are we going to do about it? And that's where we are. What are we going to do about it? They've been doing it for years. It's time that we do something about it. It just breaks my heart to hear residents come in and talk at public hearings and talk to the Board of Selectmen about what they endure living as neighbors to this quarry. And, the quarry's been getting away with it for years. And the Board of Health has failed them, and the Board of Selectmen has failed them, and the Soil Board has failed them. And, it's time for this community to, and hopefully in cooperation with PJ Keating, but I don't really feel a lot of cooperation from PJ Keating. I think PJ Keating does what they want to do and dare us to do something about it.
Roger, can I, I'm sorry to Mr. DeRoche.
Mr. DeRoche, go ahead.
Once again, as far as I'm concerned, it comes down to compliance. We haven't hired a health agent yet. I brought this up last week. I haven't heard anything about it, So another week's gone by, another 2 weeks.
Ms. Hebert, do we know anything about that position?
November. So where that stands, because all these conditions we put on this is about compliance. Yes. We say right here to comply with the statutes that Mr. Gaspar just mentioned. How do we know? How do we know? In some of our bylaws, it says at the end of the year, they're supposed to give us a report. I didn't receive any report at the end of last year or the beginning of this year, and it's already May. So once again, it's like business as usual. We're going to say, oh, you got to comply. We have no way right now, as far as I see, to keep them compliant to the regulations that we're giving them. So,
Ms. Hebert, do you have any knowledge of what's going on with that hire in the health department?
I did let Mr. Correa know that we were interested in moving forward with the position to encourage them to continue. I'm following up with them now to find out where they are with it, though.
Because as the point you made, Mr. Cabral, hours of operation is well within our limits to place an hours of operation on them.
Agreed.
In one of our conditions for soil.
Or limit weekend operations,
Okay, I mean, it's right in our bylaws.
I'm not sure what the answer is, but 24/7, I'm not sure is the answer, and that's what they're doing.
Well, whatever the hours whatever they end up being, the point is we have these tools to add conditions to the soil board permit, which is now before the selectmen. The soil board signed off on it. And if I said soil board permit, I should have said soil removal permit. Now in front of the select board. The soil board signed off on it April 10th. So now it's in front of us. And this is separate from the land use license, which is for the asphalt storage, liquid asphalt storage, which, as I understand it, we have a cease and desist order standing on that whole process.
Yes, we do.
And we don't have a town forum until May whatever date we agreed to. So that's almost a mute as far as I'm looking at it. The land use license has somehow become mute at this point. I mean, I'm sure people would argue that,
Yeah.
but
They're going to circumvent. They're already circumventing that. I'm a little bit confused on some of the chief's emails that we got about what we were doing, and they're considered, even if they're empty, they're still considered full, and if far as capacity. So with the land use license, I think the real chief is the soil board permit, the land use permit. So they're going to circumvent and do whatever the hell they want to do as far as that goes, right? But you know, I again, if it goes back to we can enforce this book, everything is here that the residents are complaining about and that we want to see addressed along with this document here. There's a lot of good stuff here. As Mr. DeRoche is saying is, when are we going to hire this person? Because that person is ultimately responsible to enforce this. And that's something I guess we haven't had, and Mr. DeRoche alluded to. It says approval of the renewal of the permit for a period not in excess of 1 year may be made by the Board of Selectmen without a hearing if the Board of Selectmen, after a report from the inspector, finds that all conditions of this bylaw and permit were then applicable and have been complied with, and that the work has been carried out continuously in good faith. That says it all right there, gentlemen. We've never gotten a letter from an inspector. Who is the inspector? I'm assuming it's the health agent right now that this is referring to. But we've never received that letter. So I guess every year we should be looking for this letter saying, have they complied to everything that's in our bylaws? And I think the selectmen and residents will be able to look around and know, especially the residents that live there, and say, they're not complying with this. Why do I have all this dust in my pool? And so we have everything that we need. It's more about enforcement at this point.
Yeah, and putting some restrictions. Just to say, I have a letter here from Kopelman and Page that says, in their general opinion, actions of a previous board cannot typically prevent a current board from enforcing its bylaws. So just because what was done previous doesn't mean we have to follow that path.
So
Agree.
What action should we take, gentlemen?
Well, we you know, in our discussion, we need to once again, maybe at our next meeting, have a series. You know, I'm promoting and advocating. You know, we need to hire someone. We need this person in place.
We do, yeah, we do.
You know, because we can put whatever
I think we need. I think we need
to
to add some teeth to the soil board permit. I do. I think we need more on the soil board. I think we need more control and more restrictions on the soil board permit.
Yeah, as a
on the soil permit, you're talking.
On the soil permit, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I mean, like I said, I'm still reading through this, so I appreciate the board wanting to take a little bit more time, because I'm reading through all these statutes and everything else, but I wrote I need a copy of that stormwater pollution prevention plan, but then I wrote right underneath of it, page 16, number H in the bylaw book. 16H in the bylaw book, again, going back to the same reference in the first sentence in the acknowledgement, says control of temporary or permanent drainage. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people, and I guess there's a couple of detention ponds that water runs off with all the silt. And I'm told that back when it was Tilcon Warren, they used to clean these things out every 2-3 years to the point where they would actually go into one of the ponds when it got really bad, and they would restore the whole pond because that silica's running through and all those stones get clogged up and then they overflow. And I'm told that hasn't been done in 6 to 8 years. So, you know, this is all goes back to what Mr. DeRoche has been saying, and I think the board has been active in doing, and the Board of Health is doing, is hiring somebody to actually enforce the documents that we already have. I mean, we have a lot of good stuff. The problem is it's been ignored.
You know, and may I just add, you know, I read section 3 again, and it talks about the Board of Selectmen, you know, the area, you know, no permit for removal shall be granted unless the Board of Selectmen finds that such removal will not be contrary to the best interest of the town. And the first two are, you know, points will be injurious or dangerous to the public health and safety, and will produce noise, dust, and other effects.
Exactly.
At lot lines. And
Every day.
Those make it so obvious.
Exactly.
About this whole thing.
That's what I'm trying to say. If we actually get somebody that's going to do that job, which we're trying to do, and they actually enforce everything that's here, I mean, really, it's under the acknowledgments page. If that person is responsible to enforce this document, acknowledgments, I mean, they got to clean up their mess over there, or they're in trouble.
They have to be compliant within the standards that are established. I mean, that's all I can ask of them. If there's standards that have been established and we do no testing to see if they're within those standards, then how do we know they're within the standards? How do I know how much rock we give them a permit to remove 800,000 cubic yards of rock out of that place? How do I know they're removing that? They could be removing twice or less.
Yeah, we don't verify that.
We don't have any verification on anything that they're doing. So,
I'll reference in the bylaw book, letter D, it basically says any permit issued hereunder shall automatically expire upon the completion of earth removal project for which it was issued, or at the expiration of 1 year from the date of issue, or upon revocation for cause by the Board of Selectmen, whichever occurs first. I think the cards are really in our hand. They can think whatever they want to think. I talked to a lot of former employees of the facility, which they don't want to obviously be named, and I told them I wouldn't name them. Obviously, they have no business to be named, but they were kind enough to speak to me. They got an attitude where they don't care. They're going to do whatever they want. The senior management are encouraged for profit. So I mean, they just got to come to the sentence and say, look, you know what? It's going to be what it's going to be. The Acushnet Board of Selectmen and the residents of Acushnet aren't going to be lenient anymore and let you do whatever the hell you want in the town of Acushnet. You're going to be a good neighbor.
I mean, we don't know what they haven't. They moved that asphalt plant up to the street from out back. I don't think anyone knows, even themselves, how loud it's going to be on Main Street when they fire that thing up. And right here, part of our bylaws, noise detrimental to the people in the neighborhood, and
Well,
if it's too noisy,
we talked about the fact that they were doing sound modeling. I expected at some point that we would see some of that sound modeling.
Right.
And they, that they were doing it part of being a good neighbor, come in and keep us updated on what they were doing and what the results of that were, and help us understand why this wasn't going to be a problem. And, we're in the dark. So way back when at an office in the DEP in Lakeville with the DEP and us and them, they were talking about the fact that they were doing that work, sort of presenting it positively, that we're doing all this sound modeling. I was led to believe that I was going to see that and what was expected. And, I'd like to know what the baseline sound levels are, and I'd like some testing after the plant's running in the middle of the night at 2:00 in the morning. What is the sound level?
Yeah.
From
Roger, in any of your conversation with the soil board members, I read something last night, and I'm trying to go back and find where I read it, but I know what I read, and it's in the DEP/EPA regs, where it specifically states if you're running a quarry/asphalt plant, any reconstruction of that facility needs to be done via engineered plans and submitted to DEP and EPA. That to my knowledge, has not been done. So they reconstructed this facility from way out back. They moved it up front, but they never notified DEP and EPA. First, they were supposed to notify them of their plans to do it, submit engineered plans to DEP and EPA for approval of the reconstruction of the facility. So how they're firing up this plant and sticking us in the eye and DEP and EPA in the eye, I'm not so sure how this company's getting away with what they're doing. I think that's the biggest. I
don't know those. I don't know those facts. I don't know about the DEP process.
It's there.
Assuming they've done what they're supposed to do. I can't imagine they wouldn't, but I don't know. I would imagine they know what they need for approvals.
Maybe we ought to ask the chairman of the soil board or the health agent to see if they can contact DEP or EPA to see if that was ever submitted to them, because we know for a fact it was never submitted to the Board of Selectmen, because we were all sitting right here, gentlemen, and I asked the fire chief, don't you find it kind of ironic that they moved the plant before they came to the board and asked for permission? And I said, don't you think that was the cart before the horse? And he said, yep, but that's what they chose to do. So, once I started digging into this and I see it's a DEP EPA requirement for any reconstruction of the plant, that rang off some bells. I'm like, did they even do this with DEP and EPA? I don't believe that's been the fact. So who did this? I know there was an engineering firm from somewhere out southwest that moved this plant for this company. And I talked to a few people that how much of a mess that became. But if it wasn't done by any kind of protocol and design and skip this and skip that, and DEP wasn't regulating those plans, how are they allowing that plant to get fired up when nobody knows if that plant's actually safe the way it was constructed? That's my biggest problem here. Public safety all the way.
Agreed.
If I can, Mr. Chair, I think to address your question, I think we should be hearing from DEP this week.
Okay.
All right. That would answer some questions.
Let's find out where the DEP is on this, and let's find out where the DEP is. I'm inclined to talk more conditions on this license as well, rather than just approve it as is. I think the soil board kicked it over to us because we wanted it, and we've got it now, and it's ours. They haven't approved it. They've passed it to us, saying, this is as far as we're willing to take it. So I think it's up to us to figure out what, if any, conditions we want on that permit. And
well, they all signed it.
I know I want more conditions on it.
It's got 5 signatures on it, so.
Yeah.
If I can, just to clarify, I just heard back from Mr. Correa. He said he's contacting the people who applied originally now. Obviously some situations have changed since the emergency pandemic has occurred. So he's currently contacting people and looking to start doing interviews. So hopefully we'll have that position filled soon.
Let's leave this here. Mr. DeRoche, go.
Well, I was just going to make a comment. Even the process of this whole permit, I don't understand. They come to us and, they applied on January 8th, and we're getting it April 20 or April 20th.
Yeah, I can speak. They paid a fee.
Yep. I mean, as the town, we don't give them the permit, and then they're operating, and so are they operating on the last year's permit, and how?
So I don't know what the long-term history of the soil board has been. I know that the permit they get now is much more robust than it ever has been in the past. I know that over the last 2 years anyway, there's been a lot of effort and energy working with Woodard and Curran to try to make that permit more robust than it's ever been, to put all of those conditions in the license. So the permit is better than it ever was before.
Oh yeah.
But now it's enforcement. I think you said before, it's time for enforcement of the fact that, all right, you know what the laws are, you know what your permit says, and you're not complying with any of that anyway. So.
But my point of this comment was that last year we signed the permit for 2019 in right around Thanksgiving of 2019.
Yeah.
That was only good for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Now this new permit is presented to us, and it's going to be May 1st, and we haven't approved it. They paid us. How are they operating? I mean, when I need a license, I go on the due date and you get it, or you submit it, and then there's a certain period of time that you have to respond to it. This could drag out all year, and they operated all year, and we never gave them a permit. So I guess that's just my comment.
No, it's a valid comment, Mr. DeRoche. I
refine the process so it's understandable to all parties. That at the end of the year, you got to sign a new one, bring it in December. We'll review it, get it back to you in a timely manner, based upon all the compliances from last year, how you did last year. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay. So thank you.
So let's try to reach out to the DEP, EPA, find out where they are in the process. I know some of those communications have happened already. Let's try to find out where they are on this plant, and if all those approvals are in place, and if Oh, it's our imagination that we've got a facility that's, blowing dust all over us, and that's the way we're supposed to live our lives here in Acushnet. That's acceptable in Acushnet. Let's find out if that's acceptable to the DEP. But I think we need to understand that. I'm concerned with that asphalt plant on the street. I've done some reading about asphalt plants. Nothing I've read's positive. I wouldn't want to live near one.
And if we can get some DEP or EPA guidance on this whole thing, that would be extremely helpful in our decision-making process.
Some of that is happening. So let's just, at this point, let's just table this. Let's keep it on the agenda for our next meeting, if that's.
Oh, that's fine by me.
And back to the agenda. Any town administrators report? We do have an executive session as well.
Yes, I do have just something quick. Chief Gallagher had forwarded to me, and I think he posted it on his social media as well, that Serve Pro of Dartmouth, New Bedford donated their time and equipment today, which was last Friday. Did a very deep clean of everything, both ambulances, all our fire apparatus, and both staff stations. Every lash, surface, and gizmo was wiped down, and both the patient and crew compartment of each vehicle was fogged. All rooms, including the garages, were fogged. This gives a wonderful advantage that we now need to redouble our efforts to maintain. The operations manager is David Colum, an Acushnet resident, and he was thanked profusely. This was from our fire chief. So I just wanted to thank them again for helping sanitize everything for the fire department, fire EMF.
On behalf of the Board of Selectmen, I'd like to thank Mr. Klum and Serve Pro as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Ms. Hebert, under Town Administrator's report?
That's all I have.
Any Selectmen announcements? Future business, our next meeting is Tuesday, May 5th, 2020 at 5 p.m. unless we need to meet sooner. Again, we know where we need to be for then. We know what our plan is. I'm not going to talk about it again. My children tell me I repeat myself. I'm not going to do it now. We do have an executive session scheduled, and we are going to go into executive session under Mass General Law 30A, Section 21A3 to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation. As an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining and litigating position of the public body, which is us, as the chair so declares, and I do. And the board will not return to regular session. And we're going to talk about a grievance we have from the police union, which has been distributed to you all.
Just for my information, we have to go to a different link, right? We close this and go.
Yeah, we got to talk about that. Do we need to?
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll leave this meeting once we adjourn, and there's a new Zoom link that you'll go into for executive session.
Very good.
So let's get a roll call vote to go into executive session, and it's going to take us half an hour to get to I suspect, but we'll see. So, Mr. Gaspar, motion to go into, vote to go into executive session.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. DeRoche.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm a yes. Okay. Adjourning, not to return, reconvening an executive session immediately, which with Zoom probably means 45 minutes, but let's all do the best we can to get there soon. Okay?